Thank you, everybody. This is a great honor to be the first one to begin. And before I begin, I'd like to ask you whether we need interpretation. Okay. So I will go on. We will go on. My name is Aliona Penziy. I'm the leading cinema academic of the National Center of Dovzhenko Centre, and I will tell you a bit about my work directly and the work of my colleagues. So today's lecture is a kind of a little teaser for the course of lectures which we are getting ready. How do I use my clicker? The lecture course which we are getting ready together with projector. This will be the online course about the history of Ukrainian animation, a short history of Ukrainian animation, and tomorrow we will announce all of that, in fact, and we'll tell more details about how you can register there, where you can see it, and when it is out. You will need to follow that at the web pages of Dovzhenko Centre and Projector. And today we will have a lecture which consists of two parts. The first one is how and where was the Ukrainian animation preserved, and in fact, how do I do that? Yeah, now it works. So it was just the other way round. Okay. We spoke about anything but not this. So, the first part, how the Ukrainian animation was born. I will tell you about the period from the creation of the first animation movie in 1927, and in fact till the big pause in Ukrainian animation which took place in the middle of the 40s and up till the beginning of the 60s, till the end of the 50s, the beginning of 60s. It was approximately for 20 years in Ukrainian animation, at least at the state level. In fact, nothing took place at all. And today we will speak, in fact, about this first period when the Ukrainian animation was born. Let me sit here, if you don't mind. I have a short prompt here. So, also I'd like to mention that this course, which we are launching with Projector, and today's lecture will not be as much about the practice of animation, but about the history, because we are the institution which preserves Ukrainian cinema, and through the cinema we research Ukrainian history. So this lecture will also be a historical, culturological. It will be about the context and content, about both, and how and when was Ukrainian animation created, and when. So let us move on to the content. This was a kind of an introduction part. So when you begin to speak about Ukrainian animation, instantly the first surname which emerges is Vyacheslav Lewandowski. This is the pioneer enthusiast of Ukrainian animation who created and is considered to be the first Ukrainian animation artist. The film about the straw bull of 1927. This animation movie unfortunately was not saved, it was not preserved, only one frame was saved, which was published in the magazine of cinema. This magazine of cinema was the publication of the 20s, 30s of the 20th century, the main, in fact, heel of the Ukrainian cinematographical process in the 20s and 30s. And there we could see the descriptions and this one frame, according to which we can imagine how this character looked. I will show you later, we'll have this frame. And Vyacheslav Lewandowski, let me come back to his biography because it deserves for attention. He was born in Kiev in the end of the 19th century, in a kind of a very intelligent family, and he had a wide range of hobbies, from ballet to theater to some technical inventions. He was first studying as in the musical drama institute, then in the Academy of Arts. And the Academy of Arts in the 20th century was the place where the elite was shaped, the elite of Ukrainian art. They taught there the famous artists like Georgy Narbut, Vasil and Fedor Krichevsky were teaching there, and there were lots of famous pupils there, students who in the 30s and 20s in fact shaped the image of Ukrainian art. And Lewandowski was also one of those who was a student there, and having a very nice basics, he began to work as the book illustrator. First, he designed the publications, and then he went to Vuvku, working there. Let me tell you what Vuvku is, what is behind this abbreviation. This is the All-Ukrainian Photo Cinema Department. This was a huge organization, in fact. Vuvku is All-Ukrainian Photo Cinema Department, which was existent only for 9 years, almost 9 years, and it, as it's written here, showed 140 feature films, several hundreds of non-feature films. It's hard to calculate how many of them were created, because maybe only half of them were preserved, a bit of the half, more than the half. The majority of the films were not saved. The worst situation was with the non-fiction and animation films, because they were scattered all over in different magazines, in different formats. And the precise statistical information is hard to collect. So during Vuvku existence, it was not just the organization which unites the film production, it also united all the 3 plants or factories which were in fact producing films: Odessa, Yalta and Kiev, and it was controlling the whole distribution which existed on the territory of Ukrainian Republic. So all the cinema equipment and education, at least 2 educational institutions were subordinate to Vuvku, and also they controlled the media, the cinema magazine, which I mentioned already above, the media, propaganda, all the processes which were connected with the cinema. They also were subordinate there. We have a table here which illustrates the indicators and the scale of their production of the movies. They are very illustrative, demonstrative. There was a very rapid development of Vuvku, and lots of representatives of Ukrainian art elite and literature and theater elite were attracted by Vuvku. They went there and worked there. A huge number of Ukrainian writers were working for Vuvku. Mikhail Semenko, Johansson, Shkurupi, Yanovsky. They were either writing film scripts or were editors at the studio, and Les Kurbas was cooperating together with his actors and actresses on the films of Vuvku. And the artists as well were attracted by this place. So Vyacheslav Lewandowski went to work to Vuvku as the designer and an artist. He was working on the films. But then, in 1926, I already mentioned that besides all of his hobbies, among diverse his hobbies, there was one interest of different technical inventions. So he was offering and is an initiator to create the technical animation unit at WUFCU, so he shaped a collective of people who began to work on animation. Though his first film, The Straw Bull, in 1927, according to the descriptions of the biographers, and not that many people wrote books about animation, but still there is such a researcher of Ukrainian animation, Boris Kryzhanivsky. And in his publication of the 60s, he described that Lewandowski was working then in the unequipped premises from early morning till late night, sometimes even going on working till the sun. And he had to make lots of discoveries in animation. He, in fact, out of the descriptions in the literature, we understand that he has such a trick, well, not a trick, but such technology as animation with hinged puppets. And this is how he created his first animation films, how they looked like you can see on the image. Those were puppets done out of the, or rather, cardboard or thick paper, or maybe even wood, but I would say more of the thick cardboard, with huge, lots of moving parts and hinged. And when he was making a movie, he was moving the characters, and this is how he reflected their movements, according to the descriptions. As on the squirrel, there were lots of those combinations which allowed to reflect a rather complicated movement of the characters as of that time. And also he did not invent, but he used such a method which has the name of éclair. When we shoot people or animals using the cinema camera, film camera, but then with the help of the special projector, they project it onto the machine for animation, so they redraw then that manually. So he did that, sometimes checking the movements of the characters, and that allowed to reflect the complicated movements of the characters. According to the biographer's ideas and the cinema magazine, he became the inventor of the filming device which he was working with from different broods of wood, well, of course, except the lens. It was glass lens. And he had the first experiments of abstract animation. Unfortunately, nothing was saved, nothing was preserved, not a single image how it looked like, this abstract animation, but we have descriptions about that. So that was Lewandowski. But if Lewandowski had to, in fact, invent a wheel, and he had to do everything on his own, then in a couple of years of the existence of this unit of animation, and the development of WUFCU, because during 9 years that was the really rapid way of development of WUFCU, the situation has significantly improved. Maybe you don't see that well, but maybe you can see it still. This is the article from the Cinema magazine, where it is described. In the middle you can see Lewandowski himself at the cinema filming device, and here it is told that at WUFCU had the only in the Soviet Union device, the French device for filming animation. They had one, the only for the Soviet Union, and also they created one more. So they created the similar device, so they had at least one more which was done by themselves. And in the end of this article there is an interesting point where it is mentioned that as for animators, we can see some of the film directors which are doing some kind of culture film. In the 20s, the culture film was a kind of scientific popular movies, or like scientific movies. That's an interesting point, at least for me. that in the 20s, when only the animation was being born, it is becoming a kind of... it in fact brings up the film directors which are dealing with scientific and scientific popular cinemas and in the films. And in the 60s, when we have the rebirth of Ukrainian animation, it is done at the studio of scientific popular films. And the scientific popular film gives its homage to its parents, I would say. So this is what I wanted to say, but it's my conclusion, but I think that it's relevant. And besides the animation films, the animators were also working with culture films or popular scientific films, as I mentioned. Those could be films about some physical phenomena or about the technological phenomena, so they needed to be reflected, it to be depicted by animation. As for the documentaries, they are working with them as well. And there were lots of propaganda films and videos done by Ukrainian animators. So now I would offer you to watch the first video. Yeah, let's watch the first video, but let me tell a couple of words about it. And what was also interesting, the precedent that the Ukrainian animators were creating animation trailers for the fiction and documentary films. We'll see the first trailer, the 11th of Zygovertov, the documentary about the construction of the hydroelectrical power plant. So this was the trailer created at Vuvku studio.
Музика це сучасна, власне, музика.
So this is the modern music, but still.
Це 27-й рік. Це фільм.
So it was done in 1927. I can go on speaking. So this film was not saved. It has been preserved. We can see it. We show this film very often in our programs of Dovzhenko Centre, and tomorrow we open an exhibition about Dnipro, and this film will be in the exposition and then in our program, so you'll have the opportunity to see it if you have a wish. But the second video, which I would like us to see now, is the animation trailer to the film The Sold Appetite. That is 1928 already, of the film director Okhlopkov. This film was not preserved. This trailer and descriptions is the only thing what we have about this film, and this is how we can guess about the plot and the style, maybe.
Сюжет
So the plot of this film is that at one moment a rich man lost his appetite. He could not eat anymore anything, and this really made him, in fact, sad. So he found a poor worker, and he, in fact, convinced him to sell his appetite, his stomach, to eat more and more. Something like that. This is the logo. This was the logo of Vuvku, a kind of a Prometheus. This is the end, right? Not yet? Yes, this is... it started from the beginning again. Okay, so... and more. Let's watch more. A bit more of animation, but a bit... we'll see how the film directors of animation movies were cooperating with the documentary material and were creating animation propaganda films or documentaries. In particular, I'd like to show you the animation film of the film director Yevhen Makarov about the construction of Dnipro hydroelectric power or station, about the construction of the first water reservoir, the first station in Ukraine like that. And it's interesting how the film director was working with the fonts, with the maps, interactive maps, all of that which should be dynamic. Let's watch this video. It's short as well, only 3 minutes.
є музика. Ні, це не оригінальна музика, це хтось із сучасних композиторів писав. У нас просто є виставка скоро.
So, this is about the construction of Dnipro hydropower plant. All of my examples are inspired by that. So this was the historical document. We could not interfere or cut anything from it, but the usual animation was really a very important driver for propaganda, so they created lots of propaganda videos, propaganda films, animation films about different processes. In particular, Lewandowski himself, in his works, there was the animation film Ukrainization, which was telling about the advantages of the Ukrainization policy. This was a kind of propaganda film on the one hand, but when he made it, this policy was already a bit, in fact, closed. And his film did not even lose the relevance. It bore certain danger, because they were not speaking about advantages of Ukrainization. Well, it was not banned, but in fact, it was not that, in fact, disseminated. The next film of Lewandowski, the feature film, was about the squirrel and the mouse who is the thief. This is the childish story, but it was banned for the positive image of Kurkul, the bourgeois of Soviets, and unfortunately this film was not preserved. So after that, Lewandowski had one more project, Knock Knock at the Hunting. It was not finalized because there were substantial changes at the studios of Vuvku. First he was working in Odessa, then he moved to Kiev. He failed to provide the process of the film production, so he had to go to Moscow. He went there and he became the person who launched the puppet animation in Moscow. And again, he was not working for a long time there, at some positions which could be affiliated with the creative sector, and at the end of his life he was working in the departments which were registering they were creating and designing different titles for the documentaries, the cinema magazines. So this was the story with Lewandowski, and in the 30s the reorganization of Vuvku started. Serious changes have started. The policy of Ukrainization was closed, repression started, and of course it concerns Vuvku and cinematographers. A rather independent organization was reorganized into so-called Ukraine Film. I mean, Vuvku was transformed into Ukraine Film, which was directly subordinate to Moscow. Before that, Vuvku had a very wide autonomy. We had rather close connections directly with the European countries before. The films of Vuvku were shown in different European countries, and we also took different films for distribution from Europe. So we could directly cooperate with the European countries. In the 30s, Vuvku was reorganized in Ukraine Film, which was subordinate to Sovkino, the Soviet film, and everything was going through Russia since then, which in fact led to the situation that, first of all, there was a substantial decrease of funding resource for Ukrainian cinematography and animation in particular, and animation as the young and a rather resourceful art needed much funding. That funding decreased, and in the 30s and early 30s there was a pause, a break in the development of Ukrainian animation. So only in the second part of the 30s we again saw the kind of renaissance of Ukrainian animation. It was connected with the names of 3 film directors and artists who have their own, well, they had education, that is Yevhen Gorbach, Semen Huyetsky and Ippolit Lazarchuk. And those directors, well, of course, not only them, but they were forming teams around themselves, which was working and going on creating animation films. And now I would like to show you, but first let me say a couple of words. the first animation film which has the name Fridge in Africa. This is not the full film, only a fragment. Its plot is rather trite for those times. In the children's propaganda literature, like the pioneers are going to Africa to help African children fight with white colonizers. It was a very popular plot then, but what was interesting that the animators decided to make it in a nice technical way, because this is the first film which is drawn on paper phase by phase. Before that we had something from the stop motion, but now it is done phase by phase. Let's see the fragment of this film. This is 1934. This is the short comment. It's 1934. So they wanted to create the continuation, a kind of a sequel. So let's watch the video so far. So this film was created stage by stage, and this was the innovative approach of the film directors Semen Huyetsky and Yevhen Horbach. The next film, which I'd like to tell you about, is Knock Knock and His Friend Bug. Maybe you heard Knock Knock before. That was in the context of Lewandowski. That was a popular character in literature, in the children's literature then. The pioneer who was helping everyone, and this film seemed to be children's as well. That was 1936. Seems, if I'm not wrong, but it had lots of propaganda points. In particular, the main plot was that the boy Knock Knock, together with his friend a bug is a little dog, they're doing something at the orchard, and suddenly this orchard was attacked by the pig with a fox, so they tried to protect it. This is the example how in the children's animation the defense topic was promoted, which was really very widely spread in the cinematography in the 30s. In 1936 they were getting ready to the Great War, and it was mentioned in the children's animation films as well, and the pig which is attacking really looks like the German military. It's just an image, but still there is certain allusion, and the fox looks like a Catholic priest. So this is a children's story, as if it is. So this film is interesting because in this animation film, for the first they used the technology of the celluloid drawings. Maybe you know about that. Celluloid is a transparent material which is very interesting, which looks like, with the special paints, the animators were drawing their characters, and it's very tight, and it simplified the process of the film production, because you didn't need to redraw the background of the character at a separate picture. You could just create the static background, and you could see how those stages of movement were changing through the transparent paper, so you did not need to use that many materials. That really simplified the process of the production of films. And I don't have this example here, but if you are interested in that, you can look you can search for our animation channel of Dovzhenko Centre. We have the selection of films of the 20s and 30s there, so you can watch it there. Maybe not anything, but still this film should be there. One more film which I'd like to mention is the first colored sound film of 1937, and Ippolit Lazarchuk and Yevgen Gorbach and Semen Huyevsky were working on it. It had the name of The Forest Agreement or The Forest Contract. This is the first colored film, but unfortunately we have only it as a black and white one. In 2013, Dovzhenko Centre, in fact, I'll tell more about that in the second part of the lecture. From the Russian State Fund, the part of Ukrainian animation and cinema legacy was taken, and the first Ukrainian animation films were among them. So we got this animation film, but we had a copy printed, I don't know, maybe because of their negligence on the black and white film, or maybe only the black and white option was preserved. We don't know for sure, but I'm sure that after our victory we will go there and take all of our films which are preserved there, and we'll definitely get to know whether the colored option of this film is preserved. So in the 30s, in the second part of the 30s, again we see this censorship pressure. More and more films are banned, even the ones which had propaganda character. They find danger in them. And there is one film which I'd like to mention now. Unfortunately, it's not preserved as well, but there is a very interesting description of it in the book of Boris Kryzhanivsky. It had the name of The Magic Ring. This is the film of 1937, where Semen Huyevsky, the film director, is trying to tell a Ukrainian story, a Ukrainian fairy tale, through the epic image, the epic form, where among the characters we have the sun, a young guy, the wind, and the frost. So those are nice poetic descriptions of this film, where they list the sequence of the stages. They're just fantastic. This animation film was not preserved, but it is compared with the film of Alexander Dovzhenko, Zvenigora of 1927. And let me tell you, this is the very substantial comparison, because this film of Alexander Dovzhenko is considered to be the first national Ukrainian film, not only because it was done by the Ukrainian team in Ukraine, but because it tells the Ukrainian history, 1,000-year history in cinema. So it's considered to be compared with this animation film. So here we have the question, how could it be out in 1937? It could not. It was prohibited. It was banned for the bourgeois Ukrainian nationalism. And after that, Semen Huyevsky stopped his career as the film director, as an animator, and he was working just as the picturesque, apolitical artist. He was working very silently during the rest of his life. So the only film director who went on with his career in the beginning of the 40s is Ippolit Lazarchuk. He was creating a film about, well, maybe they were the most propaganda films, so they were not affected that much about the Pole, in fact, trailblazers, where we can hear the Soviet song, How Vast Is My Motherland. But an interesting detail, in the reviews of this film, it is said that maybe because of the lack of professionalism of the film director, he could not, in fact, reflect the pathos of the story, so it was decreased because of this irrelevant communism. So it's interesting whether he really did it on purpose or maybe it was a kind of a political gesture. But Ippolit Lazarchuk is interesting for us because he will go on with his career. He will have a little break, a pause. In the 40s, this unit was closed of fiction animation with as a part of Ukraine film, and Ippolit Lazarchuk, in the beginning of the 60s, we will hear about him again because he is one of those who showed Ukrainian animation and made it reborn at the Kyiv Nauk Film, the studio of popular science films. So now we reached the middle of the 40s, before the war, when we had the pause in the Ukrainian animation. At least they don't do that at the state level. And concluding this part, I have several reasons for this break. First of all, kind of administrative economic reasons. The transition of Vuvko, which used to be independent and autonomous, into Ukraine film, so the resource allocated for the animation is decreased. Then the lack of wish to invest into animation, which was the kind of art which needed most of all of resources, because they don't have the understanding how these films can be distributed. And it is mentioned, you are creating a short film for 9 months and then you don't know how it can be shown, only in some selections or film magazines, but we don't know whether we need to spend so much of the resources and finances to see only 10 minutes. And also the ideological ones, like the pressure onto the cinematographers and artists. Lots of the artists don't want or can't make films with the topics which were offered. And the war, of course. The resource was decreased for the cinematographers. And secondly, animation had a too lengthy and complicated process to become quickly used in propaganda films. If during the first period of the war you needed to create quickly some propaganda films which would increase your morale, they decided to make fiction films. Of course, it was done just in a bad way, in a low-quality way, with a kind of a slip-slop attitude. Animation claimed lots of time. That is why we had this break, this pause. So let's move to the second part of the lecture, where these films are preserved, where they are stored, which I mentioned, and other Ukrainian animation legacy. The answer is simple and could be a bit more complicated. First of all is in Dovzhenko Centre. The longer answer, why it is stored there, let me tell you a couple of words about Dovzhenko Centre. This is a unique institution, the only in Ukraine, which has the comprehensive approach to the storage, studies and popularization of Ukrainian cinematography. This is the biggest cinema archive, which stores approximately 9,000 fiction and non-fiction animation films, both Ukrainian and foreign origin. And also we have a huge collection of paper documents, which are paperback documents connected with the history and practice of Ukrainian cinematography. In fact, the placards and the working materials. And as of animation, I will show what we have there. So that's about Dovzhenko Centre. This is the wonderful illustration for the lecture with my colleague Tatiana Derkach, who is in fact in the cinema archive where we store the films in the pre-digital era, when the films were done with film, in fact. And one of the films, that's an interesting thing, that one of the films which could go on for 60 minutes, it consisted of at least Each box is approximately 10 to 15 minutes. So the 6 copies of positives, then 6 copies of negatives, then contratype, then countertype. I have even the list here, what else they needed. So the sound of the magnet film, positive copy, the videos, and all the rest. All of that is listed there, so you can put it on a truck, in fact. With the animation, which was rather short, we have the full-length films and the 2-part animation films, a Cynics strip. Those boxes maybe were not that numerous, but still the volumes were huge, and which we store. And we don't only... In fact, how did we shape this collection of Ukrainian animation which is stored in Dovzhenko Centre? The first source of those films was that Dovzhenko Centre was created in 1994, but before that this was the cinema copying unit since 1938, where they created copies, distribution copies of the films, for films and animation films. They just copied. You cannot just copy the file, you had to duplicate the film, and the part of the materials were stored in the cinema factory, and they were left there. This was a kind of foundation of our film collection and animation collection in particular, because animation films were also printed out at this factory. Then in the 90s, when this Dovzhenko Centre was created, it was planned as the Cinema Foundation. Before that, we did not have the cinema archive, and it is the huge tragedy of ours, because we didn't have a space where in a centralized way we could have the archive of Pshenichny, where we could have chronicles and documentaries, but we didn't have the place where all of that could be stored, including the fiction films. And all the originals of the films, the negatives, were brought in the centralized way to Moscow, to their state cinema fund, and lots of negatives are still stored there. Apart, they had the central state cinema fund, which should have at least 1 copy. Something was left at the studios, and in the 90s, when Dovzhenko Centre was created, there was a decree that everything should be given to us for storage from all the studios. This process went on in a different way from different studios with different longitude. In particular, Ukranima studio is the studio which has been created kind of the historical succession, I would say. First Uvuvko, then Ukraine Film, then Ukrainian animation at Kiev Nauk Film, and then during the independence years there was the studio Ukranima Film. And in particular they gave us the biggest part of our collection till 2012. Gradually they were giving it to us, and 2012 it was a huge inflow. And the next stage of the animation collection storage in Dovzhenko Centre was in 2019. Unfortunately, because of the financial issues and that the studio was almost bankrupt, it was reorganized and it was joined by Dovzhenko Centre. The whole collection of films and documents connected with animation were stored in Dovzhenko Centre since then. I wanted to say that besides the films, we also have the working materials of the artists and animators. Those are options of printouts of the... For instance, this is the Irina Smirnova 1979 film, The Flower of Fern. And we really love those kinds of materials, and if there is then opportunity, we show the storyboarding, also the development of the character, And also we have the archive, personal archives of the film directors, not only film directors, the artists as well. The DPs, the photos. So those are the photos of the daily life of the studio Kyiv Nauk Film, the union of the fiction animation. This is the team of the show, of the series Captain Wrangel, and those are just like merry evening together. So we are trying to store information and to talk to people with film directors of the older generation, with the artists as well. This list can be endless, of the older generation, to collect for our archive some valuable information how Ukrainian animation was created in the 60s, in the 70s. We conduct interviews, and we had more than one interview, and then these materials were rethought and published in the lectures like this, or in the courses of lectures. So in fact, let me come back to the point that the course of the short history of Ukrainian animation, the teaser of which was this lecture, in fact, will be soon announced at the websites of Dovzhenko Centre and Projector. And to conclude, I'd like to invite all of you to the retrospective program of the film director Volodymyr Honcharov, which will take place on the 6th of October at the Festival of LINOLEUM, which will be presented by my colleague and the co-author of this course, Oleg Olifer. And in the end, I'd like to show you the short trailer which we edited for this retrospective, and I'd like to thank all of you for attention. So I wish you a very interesting festival, interesting meetings, and nice ones. Thank you for your attention. So it can be scary if you are not accustomed to that, but we are not scared by truth. We can gradually train to use it. The face of the truth is serious.